In the pale yellow sunlight of a Texas afternoon, the streets of Dallas seemed to slow down under the gentle breeze blowing through the trees. The old oak trees lean their shadows over the paved sidewalks, where shops, cafes, and luxury restaurants are still bustling with people. Located right in the heart of that bustling financial district, the Garden Lounge, a famous restaurant with a classic and modern style, still maintains its peaceful and elegant atmosphere in the middle of the busy city. For older guests who have been coming here for many years, the Garden Lounge is like a part of a living memory, where stories of life, politics, and family are told over a hot cup of tea or a glass of sparkling wine. Here, people come to temporarily forget the arguments and noise of society, to keep a little peace, even if it is just during a slow lunch. Yet, none of the guests that day expected that the appearance of a young man with a prominent red hat printed with the words, "Make America Great Again," would cause the peaceful atmosphere of the restaurant to crack with prying eyes and whispering words like silent needles piercing through. Barron Trump, now 18 years old, is tall, mature in appearance, but still retains the calm and thoughtful features of a thoughtful young man. Entering the restaurant, he paused for a few seconds to adjust his familiar red hat, a symbol of what he believes in, and also the hat he wore when he stood next to his father during the stormy election days. But today Barron did not come here to debate or express his opinions. He just wanted a peaceful lunch, a time to temporarily leave the gossip out there. Through the glass doors, sunlight streaming through the large windows. If you love engaging, dramatic stories and thrilling cases, don't forget to subscribe to the channel today. Each video is a journey full of surprises, taking you into the world of unsolved mysteries. Join me in exploring, analyzing, and feeling every detail of the story. Barron was led by Sarah Caldwell, the restaurant's young manager, to a corner table, usually reserved for guests who needed privacy. Sarah, 28, with sharp but still gentle eyes, recognized Barron at first sight. "Hello, sir, please sit down," she said, smiling politely but a little awkwardly. Though she didn't say anything, her eyes seemed to be considering something. Barron smiled softly, nodded his thanks, and pulled out a chair to sit down. He opened the menu, looking for the Southern-style beefsteak that he had heard praised many times. In that moment, he did not notice that a few older customers had stopped talking, looking at his table with puzzled, skeptical eyes. Evelyn Parker, a woman of about 62, familiar in the city's social activities, was sitting with friends at a nearby table. When her eyes caught Barron in that familiar red hat, she frowned, whispering something to the person next to her. The conversation seemed to stop at the glances, the whispers. But then Mr. Henry Caldwell, the restaurant owner, appeared from the bar. An elderly man, his face full of the scars of time, his hair already streaked with silver, walked straight to Barron's table with a serious expression. "I'm sorry," Henry began, his voice calm but firm. "We have a policy here that we don't allow political symbols in the restaurant to maintain a comfortable atmosphere for all of our guests." Barron raised his head, his blue eyes calmly looking straight at Henry. He didn't seem surprised, but a quiet disappointment flashed in the corners of his eyes. "I didn't know there was such a policy," Barron replied, his voice calm and polite. "I just wanted to have lunch. I didn't mean to cause trouble or argue." Henry clenched his fists, a little embarrassed, but Evelyn's gaze from across the table seemed to urge him to stand his ground. "I understand, but I'm afraid you need to take off that hat or leave." A heavy silence fell. The older guests, who had lived through many social events, stopped cutting their knives and forks, their eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. A nearby old man in a suit shook his head slightly, whispering, "It's just a hat, right?" Barron sat still for a few seconds. He looked around, sensing the tension in the air, then slowly stood up, picking up his hat and backpack beside him. "I'll go then," Barron said, a faint smile appearing as a way to hide his sadness. "Thanks for being so straightforward." No one spoke as Barron walked away, but many eyes followed him until the door closed. Inside, Henry watched, his expression solemn but somewhat regretful. Out on the street, Barron paused in front of the restaurant's glass door, looking at his reflection. a small image in front of a society full of arguments and judgments. He put his hat on his head again, as if. Outside the garden lounge, Barron Trump stood silently for a few minutes, letting the midday sun shine on his pensive face. The red MAGA hat was now more than just a symbol. It had become the reason he was refused service in the middle of a city he once thought was a place of freedom and civilization. The bustling traffic on Main Avenue continued its daily life, but inside Barron, something had changed. He looked around, catching the eyes of a few passers-by, some with concern, some with coldness, and some with curiosity, as if recognizing that familiar face. But he did not get angry. Barron pulled out his phone, gently opening a text message from his mother, Melania Trump. "Be strong, Barron. Always stay kind, but never let them change who you are." The words seemed to give the young man strength. He took a deep breath, held his head high, and walked away. Within an hour of Barron leaving the restaurant, a middle-aged woman who had been sitting near Barron's table posted on Facebook about what she had witnessed. "So disappointing. I saw Barron Trump refuse service for wearing a MAGA hat. He was polite, nice, and not bothering anyone, and he was asked to leave. Dallas, what is happening to us?" The post quickly garnered thousands of shares, from sympathizers to critics, and within hours it had made it to local and national television. "Barron Trump refused service at iconic Dallas restaurant for wearing MAGA hat" was the headline on every news outlet, from Fox News to more neutral outlets. The Garden Lounge, a favorite of the upper class, suddenly became the center of public opinion. Not long after, a small protest broke out in front of the restaurant. A group of Barron supporters, mostly young people and older veterans, held up signs reading "Freedom of Speech" and "Stand with Barron." Across from them, another group of protesters quickly gathered, chanting slogans against the Trump family's policies and views. The two groups stood face to face in the hot Dallas sun, and tensions escalated by the minute. An old man, a veteran of the China War named Harold Jenkins, leaned on a cane in the middle of the crowd, his voice trembling but determined. "I fought for this freedom. For a guy like Barron to wear whatever hat he wanted without being kicked out of a restaurant?" On the other side, a young woman named Emily Sanders, a social activist, loudly responded, "Freedom does not mean the freedom to insult or spread hate. Restaurants have the right to keep their space safe for everyone." The heated atmosphere was about to explode, and news of this controversy was quickly picked up by major media outlets. While everything outside was getting more and more intense, Barron Trump chose a different path. Instead of going on social media to criticize or blame, he wrote a handwritten letter, shared on social media with calm but emotional words. "I'm not angry. I understand that this country is divided, but I believe that, instead of chasing each other, we need to talk. I didn't come here to fight. I just wanted to have lunch like everyone else. And I still believe that we as Americans can sit down together, overcome our differences, and find common ground." The letter went viral at a dizzying speed with millions of shares in just a few hours. Many older Americans who have experienced difficult periods of the country such as war and crisis also spoke out in support of Barron. A 70-year-old man commented, "I wore the uniform. I went through the tough days to protect that freedom. Barron showed us what it means to be mature." In the face of criticism and controversy, Henry Caldwell, the owner of the restaurant, finally had to hold a public press conference. He appeared, his old face showing signs of fatigue, but his voice was sincere. "I apologize to Barron Trump. I let my fear and anxiety about my reputation dominate me. I didn't think about his feelings or the lesson of tolerance that I should have shown. If Barron accepts, I would like to invite him back here to have lunch with me. A lunch to listen to each other." That same evening, Barron Trump responded on television, "I accept the invitation, but I want not only the two of us, but all the people of the city, whether they support or oppose, to have a voice. We will hold a public meeting so everyone can speak their minds." That afternoon, the area in front of the Garden Lounge where Barron Trump had quietly left amid the whispers of diners was now transformed into an outdoor auditorium. The chairs were neatly arranged in long rows, covered with simple but solemn white cloth. A large sign was erected, emblazoned with the words, "A meal, a conversation, to understand each other, to go further." Dallas residents flocked in, from the white-haired old men who had witnessed many protests in American history, to the young people carrying excitement and curiosity. Local newspapers, national reporters, and even major TV channels such as CNN and Fox News all sent teams to report. No one thought that the story of a MAGA hat could bring this city to a rare moment of a meeting to listen and heal. When Barron Trump appeared, he did not wear a fancy suit, nor did he try to stand out. He chose a simple outfit of jeans, a blue shirt, and still wore the red hat that had caused a stir. But today, it was like a symbol of courage. Barron stood in front of the microphone. In the gentle sunlight of the afternoon, his eyes determined but still shining with the youthfulness of his 18 years old. "Hello, everyone," Barron began, his voice clear. "I know that many of you are here to support me, and some of you are here because you disagree. And that's why I'm here to listen." The whole space fell silent. Barron slowly continued, "I don't want today to become a debate. I want this to be a place where people can express their feelings, things that perhaps we have kept hidden for too long." Mr. Henry Caldwell, the owner of the Garden Lounge, who had bluntly asked Barron to leave the day before, now stood opposite him, his face a mixture of shyness and determination. He stepped to the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd and stopping at Barron. "I don't know where to start." Henry sighed. "Maybe with an apology. I was scared that day. I was worried about the image of the restaurant, about what people would say. And I forgot that, first and foremost, you are a human being like anyone else who walks into my store." The room fell silent, many blinking, moved by the rare confession. "I was wrong. No one deserves to be treated like that because of their beliefs. And today I come here not just to apologize to Barron, but to apologize to everyone for how easily we have divided each other." Then, one by one, the people stood up to speak. A 76-year-old white-haired woman named Margaret said, her voice trembling but clear, "I lived through the dark years of segregation. I know what it's like to be looked down upon. I don't support that hat, but I support the right to be who we are. If we don't learn to live together, our children will suffer much more than we did." Next came Tommy, a veteran, about 65. "I don't support everything that hat represents, but I fought for the freedom to wear it. And if I had to choose between a country where everyone has to keep quiet and be at peace, or a country where we can speak our minds, no matter how different, I'd choose the latter." The audience applauded, not because of who won or lost, but because they saw themselves in those words. A young woman named Maria, 32, stood up, her voice choked up. "I am an immigrant. I was scared when I saw that hat, because to me, it was a symbol of the words that hurt me. But when I looked at Barron today, I realized that maybe I never gave others a chance to explain. Maybe I need to open up too." The whole room fell silent. Barron walked up and spoke softly into the microphone. "Thank you. I don't know your past, but I know what it feels like to be hurt. If I can help you understand that, I don't hate anyone. I'm willing to listen to your story, no matter how painful it is." At that moment, all invisible barriers seemed to disappear. At the end of the meeting, Barron returned to the stage. His voice was quiet but hopeful. "Today, I learned something. We all carry different stories, hurts, and beliefs. But if we sit together, look each other in the eye, and listen to each other, something magical happens. We begin to understand each other. I don't expect anyone to agree with all my thoughts. I just want us to understand that despite our differences, we all deserve respect." The whole space resounded with endless applause. The next day, all the newspapers reported on this historic meeting. Barron Trump in Dallas, when the Red Hat opened an unprecedented dialogue, Dallas Morning News. From all over the United States, people discussed not only the event but also the profound human lesson: know how to listen, know how to dialogue, know how to forgive and accompany each other. After the meaningful handshake between Barron Trump and Henry Caldwell, many Dallas residents were surprised. No one thought that the restaurant manager who had chased Barron that day was the one who planned the biggest community event ever with him. But Barron always believed in one thing: true change only begins when people who have disagreed together act. Just 3 days after their public meeting, Barron and Henry met again at a small coffee shop, away from the media spotlight. No more scrutinizing eyes, no more whispers from regular customers, just two ordinary people facing each other over steaming cups of coffee. Henry was the first to speak, his voice still hesitant. "Barron, I'm not sure I can do this," Henry said, his eyes looking far away out the window. "I've damaged the restaurant's reputation, damaged myself, and I don't know if people will forgive me." Barron listened, not interrupting. He understood the feeling. "Henry, who among us hasn't made a mistake?" Barron replied, his voice warm and sincere. "But courage isn't about not making mistakes. It's about standing up and correcting them. You and I both have something to prove, not to others, but to ourselves." Henry smiled faintly, but his eyes softened somewhat. "So, what do you think we should do?" "A community event," Barron replied, his eyes lighting up. "Right at your restaurant. But not just to apologize, but to open up a real dialogue between people who don't seem to be able to sit at the same table." The name "A Table for All" came to Barron just a few days after that conversation. An idea of an outdoor party where everyone eats, talks, and listens together. No long speeches, no political debates. "We don't need speeches. We need real stories. Old men who worked in factories for 30 years, single mothers, college freshmen. Everyone has a story, and that day, they will be heard, they will be seen." Barron explained when he met Henry again to plan the details. Henry hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "If you dare to do that, I'll be willing to turn my restaurant into a place for good things to start." When news of the Table for All event spread, the Dallas community had mixed reactions. One side supported it, saying that this was a necessary step to heal the divide. The other side strongly opposed it, saying that Henry was just putting out the fire after a mistake, and that Barron was just looking for attention. The media rushed to analyze. Social networks were in an uproar. What is a party for? A handshake cannot erase the division in society. An angry comment on Twitter. Finally, someone dares to speak frankly. Barron and Henry are doing what many politicians dare not do. A Facebook account shared, along with a picture of Barron and Henry sitting across from each other. On the day of the event, the garden lounge was transformed into an open space. Long tables and chairs were placed next to each other, covered with pure white tablecloths. Fresh flowers were simple but elegant. The menu was a mix of Texas comfort food: burgers, tacos, bean soup, apple pie. People came from all over, from Barron's supporters to his fierce critics. Henry stood at the door, personally welcoming each guest. Barron stood by, shaking hands and smiling. Many approached Barron with suspicious eyes, but it was his calm and humble demeanor that eased the atmosphere. In the middle of the party, Barron stood up, took the microphone, but instead of speaking, he invited those around him to share. A middle-aged man, James, a former firefighter, told of the days he witnessed America divided after the protests. "We used to be a strong community, but now I'm afraid to step out in the street because I'm afraid someone will hate me just because I wear a uniform." A young woman, Maria, of Mexican descent, stood up and choked up. "I used to think someone like Barron would never understand my fear. But today, seeing him sitting here, I'm starting to believe that maybe we're all trying to understand each other." Henry stood up, took the microphone, his voice trembling. "I've lived 50 years, and I've never felt so small as when Barron walked into my restaurant. I thought I was defending principles, but in fact I was just hiding my own fear. Today I stand here, not as a restaurant manager, but as a father, a neighbor, trying to make things right." The whole room was silent. Many people could not hold back tears. At the end of the event, Barron stood up. "I'm not sure that today we erased all divisions, but I'm sure that today we sat at the same table. And that is the beginning of hope. The whole restaurant stood up and applauded. Strangers hugged each other, shook hands. Within 24 hours of the Table for All party, the hashtags @TableForAll and United with Barron climbed to the top trends on Twitter and Facebook. Photos of Barron shaking Henry's hand and the faces of Dallasites laughing and crying as they shared the story went viral. A retired soldier from Ohio commented on the photo, "I served this country but came home to find us more divided than ever. Thank you, Barron and the people of Dallas, for giving me hope that maybe America still has a chance to unite." A single mother in New Jersey shared the video and wrote, "I don't care about politics, but seeing Barron standing among people who used to oppose him, I understand what courage is. Maybe it's time for me to step out of my comfort zone and talk to the neighbors I used to avoid." Soon, communities in Chicago, Atlanta, and New York began talking about holding similar events. On a popular morning talk show, host Mary Peterson told the audience, "I think what Barron and Henry did is not just for Dallas. It's a lesson for all of America. If an 18-year-old boy can sit down with the person who fired him, then we, as adults, should be able to do it." As for Henry, his life has changed completely. In just 1 week, Henry received hundreds of messages and emails from all over. There were criticisms, but most were support for him for having the courage to admit his mistakes. A 70-year-old woman in California wrote to him, "Henry, I once turned away a neighbor because we had different political views. Your actions made me realize that maybe I need to go knock on their door and apologize." Henry, who used to keep a habit of not reading social media, now opens his phone every morning, and each line he reads makes him more determined to correct his mistakes. As for Barron, a boy who often avoided the media, he is now being hailed by the national media as a symbol of a young generation who dares to talk. But Barron is not proud. When asked by a reporter, "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Barron just smiled and replied, "No, I'm not a hero. I'm just a young person who wants to be heard and wants others to be heard." The event in Dallas quickly attracted the attention of politicians and the national press. A Texas state senator, despite his political views, also spoke up. "We can disagree, but no one should be thrown out of a restaurant because of their hat or their opinion. Thank you, Barron, for reminding us of freedom and respect." However, not everyone agreed. A prominent New York Times columnist wrote an editorial in opposition. "Does an event like this really heal wounds, or is it just a way to calm public opinion? We need more than meals to address the problem of division." Despite the controversy, the positive effects are undeniable. Cities like Austin, Nashville, Philadelphia, Boston began hosting their own versions of Table for All. People from all walks of life, police officers, teachers, students, immigrants, veterans all sat down together, sharing their stories. A Boston mother tearfully said at the event, "I used to teach my children to stay away from people who think differently than us. But today, I learned that if I continue to do that, I will teach my children to hate." Later that month, in a live interview with CNN, Barron was asked, "If you could say one thing to all the divided Americans out there, what would you say?" Barron paused for a moment, then replied, "I know we may be different on everything, politics, religion, race, gender, but I want people to remember that before we are different, we are human, and as human beings, we deserve to be respected and listened to. Let's start by listening." Within a month of the first Table for All event, dozens of cities, large and small, across the country, from New York to San Francisco, from St. Louis to Nashville, stood up to host similar dialogue dinners. People called the movement by affectionate names: United Tables, Hopeful Conversations, Let's Sit Back and Bridge the Gap, dinners. Each place, each city, the story is told differently, but all begin with a simple desire: to understand and be understood. In Detroit, once a bustling industrial center, now struggling with economic crisis, a former factory worker and a young immigrant from Syria sat down together, sharing their fears and hopes for the future. The middle-aged American, after listening to the young man talk about the losses from the war, broke down in tears and said, I never thought I would sit next to someone like you. But now I understand. Loss is loss. Even though our skin color and language are different, our pain is the same. In Ohio, where Barron grew up, a group of veterans and young progressive college students sat together in a small auditorium, and, for the first time, both sides listened. A 65-year-old American veteran, his voice trembling, said, "I used to think that kids like you don't understand anything about this country. But today, when I heard you talk about your dreams and worries, I realized that I, like you, want a better America." A female student replied in tears, "And I never thought that people like you, who have been through war, would also worry about the future like me." What's special is that as this movement grew, many famous people, even politicians, began to speak up. But Barron Trump, who started this wave, chose to stay behind, not taking the spotlight, not making political statements. In a rare interview, Barron said, "I don't do this to be famous. I just do it because I believe that if we don't start talking, this country will fall apart. And I don't want to live in an America where everyone sees each other as enemies." But not everyone supports it. At a connecting dinner table event in Florida, a group of radical protesters showed up, carrying signs and shouting, trying to disrupt the Reconciliation Party. A young man in the group shouted, "You are fake. You are just trying to appease without solving any problems." The atmosphere, which was initially warm, suddenly became tense, but instead of responding with shouting, the people sitting around the table invited them to sit down. A 78-year-old black woman held the angry young man's hand and said softly, "Son, I don't know what you are angry about, but if you sit down and tell me, I will listen." At that moment, the young man burst into tears, sat down and began to talk about his father losing his job, about feeling abandoned in his society. And the whole meal that day became one of the most tearful and forgiving parties. After the movement spread, Barron received an invitation from the White House to share about the National Healing Initiative. But what surprised everyone was that Barron refused and simply replied, "I don't want this to be part of politics. We need tables, not stages." The climax of the movement was National Table Day, which took place on the National Mall right in front of the Capitol. Thousands of people from all over the United States, of all classes, skin colors, and opinions, sat on tablecloths that stretched for miles. They ate together, listened to each other. No one carried signs, no one argued back and forth, just listened. Forever, a Latino man and a white veteran clinked glasses together and said, "For too long, we have let division take away our common meal. Now it's time to take it back." When asked to speak, Barron Trump stepped onto a simple stage set up in the middle of the lawn, looked at thousands of people sitting together and said, "Maybe I'm just a boy wearing a red hat in a small restaurant, but today, when I see all of you here, I understand that America is not tweets or arguments on TV. America is people who know how to love, know how to forgive, and know how to start over. And I believe when we sit down together, we will never be afraid of each other again." As the sun has just risen in the American sky, the Connecting Table movement, initiated by Barron Trump from a stormy lunch at the Garden Lounge, is now no longer limited to coffee shops or restaurants. It has begun to creep into the most sacred places of American community life, schools and churches, where each person's personality and values are formed. At a small high school in Columbus, Ohio, Principal Mary Thompson, a woman in her 60s, watched the news about the Connected Dining Table event and felt something touch her heart. "My kids come to class every day, but they sit at different tables based on their skin color, their family background, their parents' political beliefs. I don't want to see another generation divided," Mary said at a school board meeting. And so, the Connected Dining Table was born, the first in the school's 100-year-old history. That day, hundreds of students were invited to a modestly decorated schoolyard with no flags or banners, just long white tables, plates of muffins, and lemonade. Jacob, a 16-year-old white boy who was often teased because his parents were divorced, sat next to Maria, a Mexican girl who was often mistaken for un-American. At first, the two of them just looked at each other awkwardly. But then, when a teacher came up and asked, What do you think scares you the most when talking to others? Jacob answered softly. I'm afraid of being judged, afraid that people will think I'm weak. Maria looked at Jacob for a long time and then whispered, Me too. I'm afraid that people will hate me just because I'm different. At that moment, a small bridge was built. The whole schoolyard, groups of students sat next to people they used to avoid, laughed together, shared their secret fears, stories that no one dared to tell. A 14-year-old African-American boy, who was teased by his friends for being an immigrant, said for the first time, I wish people would understand that I love this country as much as anyone else. At the same time, at a small church in Tennessee, Pastor David, a gray-haired man who had served in the military, was struggling with a big question. We light candles and pray for peace, but do we dare sit with people we disagree with? He decided to turn that Sunday service into a community connection dinner table. The altar table, usually reserved for the Bible, was transformed into a dining table. Elderly, young, white, black, Latino, all gathered together, sharing simple food that everyone could bring. A white widow, for the first time, sat next to a young black couple she had never greeted. She said, I lost my husband in the war, and I realized the pain of losing a loved one has no color. No one could hold back their tears, and they held hands for the first time in a country with too many invisible boundaries. When they heard about the event in Columbus, Barron Trump quietly visited the school. No one knew in advance, no cameras, no press. He stood silently in the corner of the schoolyard, watching the students chatting and laughing. A teacher recognized Barron, walked over and asked quietly, Do you want to speak? But Barron just smiled and shook his head. No, this is their day, not mine. Then he walked over to a table where Jacob and Maria were sitting, took off his cap, bowed, and said softly, Thank you. You did what adults often don't dare to do. At that moment, the whole school was silent for a few seconds, then erupted in applause. From all over, handwritten letters were sent to Barron Trump's office address, from old people to young children. A 78-year-old veteran in Nebraska wrote, I lost faith in the younger generation until I saw you and what you are doing. I hope to live long enough to see America healed. A 10-year-old girl in Oklahoma sent a drawing. I drew a long dining table, everyone sitting together and holding hands. The event grew so big that a group of politicians protested that the connecting table was a political stunt. A congressman snarled on television, Don't think a boy named Trump can fix a long-standing rift with just a few meals. But thousands of comments from the public soon followed. If a young man dares to start, why can't adults do it? In a rare television appearance, Barron said simply but powerfully, I'm not perfect. I'm just a young man who feels pain when my country hurts. If I can start by sitting down with others, why don't we try? As the spring sunshine spread across Washington, D.C., what started as a stormy lunch at the Garden Lounge has now reached the most fortified walls of America, the United States Congress. News of the connecting dining table spread so quickly that it caught the attention of even the most polarized lawmakers. No one expected that an 18-year-old like Barron Trump could do what decades of debate and resolutions had failed to do: get people on both sides of the aisle to sit down together. On a quiet morning at his home in Florida, Barron Trump sat at his desk and wrote the words that would later stir America. Dear members of the United States Congress, I am not a politician. I have not come to make demands or to argue. I simply want to invite you to sit together as Americans at a simple table, a dining table, where we can share a meal, but more importantly, our common concerns, hopes, and responsibilities to this country. If I, a young man, can do it, I believe our Congress can do it too. Sincerely, Barron Trump. The letter was sent to every member of Congress, from the most hardline Democrats to the most longtime Republicans. The initial response was varied. Senator William Harris, 68, a longtime conservative from Texas, smirked as he read the letter. A Trump kid? What are we sitting together for? More lessons on love and harmony? But on the opposite side, Senator Maria Gonzalez, a 55-year-old Latina from California, sat silently for a long time after reading the letter. Maybe we should listen, because if the youngest person is calling for unity, then why should we turn our backs? Debates raged across Congress, but for the first time everyone was talking about the same thing. Should we sit together? After weeks of debate, a special session was held in the Congressional Grand Chamber. That day, Barron Trump entered the meeting room wearing a simple white shirt, no tie, no formal suit as is usually seen in politics. On his chest was a small badge engraved with the words, "Together." The room fell silent as he stepped to the podium. In a deep but clear voice, Barron began, "I didn't come here to talk about my father. I didn't come here to talk about elections or power. I came here to talk about us, Americans, who forget that before we are members of any party, we are all part of the same country. I've seen children willing to sit together, grandparents willing to put aside their differences to hold hands. And today, I have only one question. If they can do it, why can't you?" No one laughed, no one was sarcastic. Silence filled the air. But then an unexpected turn of events occurred. Senator Harris, standing, said sharply, "You're standing here lecturing us about unity? Do you know how deep the wounds in this country are?" The atmosphere was tense, but Barron, without hesitation, without fear, stepped out of the podium, went straight to Harris, and extended his hand. "Sir, I'm not here to teach anyone. I'm here to start something new, and I'll eat with you if you'll let me." The room was silent, but then Harris, after a few seconds of silence, shook Barron's hand with a trembling hand, her eyes filled with tears. A week later, Barron organized the first Congressional Connections lunch right in the middle of the main hall. No reporters, no cameras, no slogans, just round tables, each with congressmen from different parties. People saw Mr. Harris sitting with Ms. Gonzalez for the first time in 10 years without looking at each other. People saw young congressmen, old congressmen, Republicans, Democrats eating sandwiches, drinking coffee, laughing and listening to each other. At the end of the lunch, Barron stood up, looked around at the faces that had been tense just a few weeks ago, and said, "Today, we didn't solve all the problems, but we sat together. And I believe that's the first step to healing. America is not a perfect family, but it is a family. And if families don't talk to each other, families fall apart. So, let's keep sitting, keep listening." The next day, although Barron did not invite the press, news of the meal spread across newspapers, social media, and television. CNN, Fox News, NBC all held panel discussions. Is Barron Trump the first young person to bring the U.S. Congress back to the Houses of Parliament in decades? And the story ended with the image of Barron walking out of the Congress, standing looking at the fluttering American flag. In his final short interview, he simply said, "I didn't change America, but I hope I planted a seed." As Barron Trump left the Capitol that day, the wind blew gently through his hair. The sky was a deep blue, a scene that seemed peaceful, but contained many new expectations that millions of Americans were placing on him. The lunch at the connecting table in Congress seemed like a symbolic act, but no one expected it to spark a real movement across the country. Although the movement spread everywhere, Barron Trump did not choose to stand on the sidelines and let things happen on their own. Every week he hosts a live stream called Online Connection Dinner Table, where people from all over the state can join in, sharing their family stories, the pain of social division, and their hopes for the country. The viewers are not only young people, but also many elderly men and women of German, Italian, Mexican, African American descent, even 70, 80-year-old veterans who have never been online before, learning how to turn on Zoom for the first time to join in. Once, Mr. John, 78 years old, from Texas, shared, "I once lost a close friend because of political debates, but today, sitting here with people I used to consider opponents, I see that everyone only wants the best for America." That quote spread strongly across social networks, receiving more than 2 million shares in one night. But not everyone supported it. Some extremist groups began to attack Barron Trump. Threatening emails appeared in his inbox, mocking and defamatory posts on closed political forums. Once, a connecting dinner in Oklahoma was disrupted by a group of protesters, shouting and holding protest signs, forcing the participants to disperse early. Barron received advice from lawyers and friends. "Stop it, Barron. You have done more than what people expected." But he responded with a sentence that moved many people. "If I give up, what will those who bravely sat down together think? I did this not for me, but for them, for America." After emotional days with connecting dinner taking place in many states, Barron Trump sat in his family's simple living room, his eyes looking far away through the window, where the golden sunset was gradually falling. On the small wooden table in front of him were a series of handwritten letters from all over, the shaky handwriting of old men and women, the heartfelt words of veterans, of ordinary Americans who have never been heard in this conflicted society. A letter from Mr. Thomas, 82 years old, a veteran of the Korean War, made Barron unable to hold back his tears. "Barron, for the past 20 years I have not talked to my best friend because we argued about politics, but after hearing your story, I called him. We cried together and finally hugged each other after so many years of being cold." He held the letter, his hand squeezing gently, as if to feel the pain and hope of people he had never met. That evening in a private meeting with close friends, Barron said, "It's time for more than just small meals. America needs a special day where people from all over the country sit down together, from churches to coffee shops, from parks to family porches." The room fell silent. A bold but necessary idea. National Unity Table Day. Every city, every village, every neighborhood would have at least one unity table where people would talk, put politics and religion aside, and just talk about what makes them American. The chosen date, the last Saturday in September, right before the election, as a reminder to America, we are still one nation, despite our differences. When Barron announced the initiative on national television and social media platforms, the country exploded. Veterans, teachers, pastors, business people, students, and even famous artists shared messages of support. People in small towns like Wichita, Kansas, and Bowling Green, Kentucky, began setting up long tables in downtown parks. Coffee shops like Starbucks and local restaurant chains volunteered to open their doors for free to connecting tables. Most notably, an invitation from the White House. Presidents of all parties announced they would attend connecting tables at the White House, open to people from all walks of life. As National Connecting Day approached, a series of touching stories were told across the media. In Alabama, a white police officer and a black man who had been in a racially charged altercation sat down for lunch together, held hands, and apologized. In Chicago, a single mother of Mexican descent and a retired soldier who had opposed immigration cried as they talked about the American dream they were both trying to hold on to. In New Hampshire, a 90-year-old World War II veteran shook hands with a young LGBTQ+ man and said, "You and I are different, but we are both Americans." But not everyone was on board. Extremist groups from both sides of the political aisle began threatening to sabotage the movement. Several lunches in major cities like New York and Seattle were threatened with anonymous letters. A group of radical protesters planned to attack a meal in Ohio, where Barron was to attend. Security agencies had to step in, ensuring the safety of Barron and the participants. Despite his worries, Barron was determined not to cancel the event. "If I'm afraid, how am I different from those who want to keep America from uniting? I'll sit down and eat that meal with anyone who dares to come." On the day of the event, thousands of people gathered in Ohio's Central Park, under rows of American flags fluttering in the autumn wind. The longest table in America was set up, stretching more than 200 m. Each person brought a family dish from Southern barbecue, New England apple pie, to Asian immigrant hot soup. Barron appeared, wearing a simple white shirt, no assistant, no security team surrounding him, just himself, with a sincere smile. As he sat down next to an 85-year-old woman, her eyes filled with tears, she held Barron's hand and said, "You gave me hope that America can still be one big family." The whole park erupted in applause and tears. Barron stood up, his warm voice resounding through the microphone. "I am not a perfect person. My family has made mistakes too. But I believe that if we continue to see each other as enemies, America will fall apart. I stand here today not to protect anyone, but to protect the most precious thing, Americans. Let's eat together, talk, and find the kindness that once made this country. After the success of the national dinner table, Barron Trump continued to receive letters and messages from people all over America, but one letter in particular made him stop. It was a handwritten letter from a small town in Mississippi, from a 14-year-old girl named Grace Thompson. Uncle Barron, I don't know if anyone will read this letter, but I want to say that I really like your idea, but I also want to ask, can it reach places like my town? Here, my family and my neighbors don't talk to each other just because of the election. I don't know when they will forgive. I just want a real family, not people who argue every day. Barron held the letter in his hand, sitting quietly in his office. A 14-year-old girl did not deserve to live in such a divided world. If we really want change, we have to go where it's needed the most, he told his team. Instead of continuing to stay in places that supported him, Barron Trump decided to do something bold. He would go to the most divided parts of America, places where hate was ingrained in every street, every neighborhood, every family. A week later, Barron Trump and a small group of people secretly set foot in Greenville, Mississippi, a town once known for its unity but now torn apart by political tensions. Before arriving, he received warnings from many sides. People there do not welcome you. They have been divided for too long. You cannot change anything. They will turn against you as soon as you step foot in town. But Barron came anyway. He did not come to change the world overnight. He came to listen. However, as soon as he got out of the car, a crowd was waiting in front of the city hall. There were angry faces, people holding signs of protest, and eyes filled with curiosity, but also suspicion. Barron stood there, under the gaze of hundreds of people, alone with no bodyguards, no media, just a young man who wanted to find out why they hated each other so much. An older man, Robert Harris, 67, a veteran, stepped forward. His voice was low and challenging. "What are you doing here? Do you think a meal can heal the wounds we have suffered for decades?" The air was tense. The people around nodded in agreement, waiting to see how Barron would react. But Barron did not back down. He looked straight into Mr. Harris's eyes, his voice soft but firm. "I don't think a meal can change everything. But I think if we don't try, we'll be here forever, hating each other." A silence fell. "If you think I don't understand what you're going through, then let me listen. I'm not leaving until I hear your story." Barron had arranged a meal right in the center of town, but it was unlike any other event. There was no music, no speeches, no political slogans, just people facing each other with food they had brought themselves, and one rule. No one was allowed to leave until they had heard at least 3 stories from 3 people who opposed them. No one wanted to be the first to speak, but then a single mother, Helen Carter, stood up. She looked around, then took a deep breath. "I lost my brother over a political argument. We stopped talking, and then he died of a heart attack. I never got a chance to tell him I loved him." The crowd fell silent. A few looked down. "I don't want any of you to go through this." And then, one by one, they began to open up. A white former police officer and a black man who had protested against him shook hands for the first time in 10 years. A family that hadn't spoken to each other because of the election sat at the same table, nodding silently at each other. Barron sat there, not speaking, not trying to steer the conversation, just listening. He understood that reconciliation doesn't come from speeches, but from understanding between people. After that day, Greenville didn't immediately become a perfect place. But one thing has changed. They have started talking to each other. A farm has opened its doors to both groups of once opposed communities. A cafeteria that was once boycotted by one group of customers has become a neutral meeting place. And a 14-year-old girl named Grace Thompson has seen the magic happen right in her own right. Barron stood before the crowd, her voice filled with emotion. "I didn't come here to prove that I'm right. I came here to prove that we can sit down, no matter how many differences we have, And if we can do this in Greenville, we can do it anywhere. That afternoon, as the last light of the day stretched across the small streets of Greenville, Barron Trump walked quietly along the Central Park where people had once argued fiercely, but now there was timid laughter, soft as the buds of hope were rising. He stopped, looking at the people who had been strangers that morning, now cleaning up the tables and chairs together after the most special meal in town. There were handshakes, eyes still sad but knowing how to find each other to share. Barron smiled, but it was the smile of someone who knew his work had only just begun. Perhaps the hardest thing was not sitting down for the first time, but keeping that conversation going. He thought of Grace, the 14-year-old girl with bright eyes full of desire, of Robert, the tough man who had finally opened up, and of those who were not yet ready to forgive. The biggest question remains: how can those who have just opened their hearts today not close them tomorrow? How can they rebuild a broken community from those simple meals? Barron understands that Greenville is just a piece of the larger puzzle of America, a country that is still fractured, still finding a way for people who thought they could not share a table to sit together. And he knows there are many other Greenvilles out there, towns, families, hearts that need someone to rekindle their faith. So, where will Barron Trump's journey take him next? Will it be big cities full of complications, or small countrysides filled with many silent pains? That answer, perhaps, is still waiting for each of us who are watching this story to continue writing. If you ever feel divided, if you ever feel tired of the invisible walls that separate your family, your friends, your neighbors, remember, change can start with just a greeting, a meal, or a story heard. Leave your thoughts in the comments. If Barron came to your town, what would you say to him? The journey's not over yet, and it needs all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, Barron Trump's story is not simply about a meal or a small town, but it is a reflection of our American society today. A society where, sometimes, just because of differences in opinion in politics, we turn our backs on our loved ones, our closest neighbors. We've probably all seen or experienced it. A family meal that's no longer fun because of endless debates. A longtime friend who stops talking because he supports a different candidate. A community that doesn't come together like it used to just because of a red or blue vote. But Barron's story reminds us that when differences become greater than humanity, we lose our very identity as an American. If you believe America can still heal, call MENT reconciliation to start over today. Who have you had a conflict with because of politics? Share your story below. Maybe someone needs your story to change. Like and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to bring humane and emotional stories like this. Share this video with your friends and family so Connected Dining Table can reach millions of American hearts. See you in the next videos.